Good afternoon. After a few weeks break, we continue today with our online lecture series on mobility analysis and planning for human-scaled cities. We organized this series here at the Mobility Lab of the University of Tartu, together with Siiri Silm, who is an associate professor in human geography, and my name is Age Poom, and I am an associate professor in urban environment. The aim of the series is to explore how data analysis and planning can support sustainable travel behavior, shape high-quality and human-scale urban environments, and foster sustainability transitions more broadly. During the current 5th season of the series, we focus on public transport. The lectures address national and municipal approaches to public transport planning and governance, travel satisfaction and travel behavior through targeted interventions, collaboration between public transit service providers in delivering journey planning and ticketing solutions, and the use of mobility data in modeling multimodal urban travel. All lectures are recorded with the help of our technical partner, University of Tartu Television, and they can be watched online from the lecture series website transportplanning.ut.ee. Today, we are most glad to welcome here Gerhard Wennerström from Samtrafiken. Samtrafiken is a Swedish organization which is responsible for coordinating nationwide public transport ticketing and shared sales solutions. Gerhard is the company's managing director, and he has extensive experience in public transport governance, digital ticketing, and inter-organizational collaboration. Gerhard's work focuses on aligning technical standards, commercial models, and regulatory requirements to enable seamless travel across operators and regions, while addressing the structural and economic complexities of shared public transport systems. Today's lecture, entitled Interoperable Ticketing and the Realities of Shared Sales in Public Transport, looks at the digital integration of public transport booking and ticketing systems, more specifically, how EU regulation, technical standards, and customer expectations are pushing a change, while existing business models and commercial structures create real friction that policy discussions often overlook. Drawing on experience from Sweden, we will explore what interoperable ticketing actually looks like in practice. If you have any questions to Gerhard, please post them to the chat box on Zoom. We will moderate the questions after the lecture. Now, Gerhard, welcome to the series, and the screen is yours.
Yes, as Age told you, my name is Gerhard Wennerström, and it's a real pleasure to be with you here today. I'm the managing director of Samtrafiken in Sweden, as she said, and today I will talk about something that sounds quite technical in a way, interoperable ticketing and shared sales in public transport. But I would like to start somewhere completely different, with a simple question, and that being, why do you have public transport in your country? Think about this. I don't want let's say, the official answer and not what it's written in some kind of policy documents and so on, but in reality, write it down for yourself. We don't have the interaction here that I could listen to all of your let's say, answers. But what I have noticed over the years is that when people answer this question, they tend to describe what public transport does. It reduces emission, reduces congestion, maybe improves accessibility and creates attractive cities. And all of that is, of course, true, but those are answers to the what, not the why. So let me suggest here a different answer, a more fundamental one, that public transport exists because it is efficient. It's efficiency in moving people, it's efficiency in using space, it's efficiency in using resources. And this is important because once you start looking at public transport through the lens of efficiency, then everything else starts to make sense. Mass transportation is efficient. Shared journeys are efficient. Shared vehicles are efficient if they are used in the right way. And once you have an efficient system, you can use it to achieve other goals, like environmental goals, social goals, or accessibility goals. So today, I will use this idea of efficiency as a way to understand something that is often seen as complex: interoperable ticketing and shared sales. Now, if you want to understand the public transport system, we can look at them from two different directions. One way is to look at from the top. We have the politics and authorities and things like that. Or then we can look at it from the bottom, that we have data, we have standards, and we have products. So let me show you this. I will keep to this throughout my lecture today. And this is, if you look at it from the top here, we have the politics, is that why we do things, authorities is who is responsible. And then from the bottom, we have data, that what do we share, standards is how we describe it, and then products, what do we actually offer. And in the middle here, we have something that is often overlooked, and that is governance, how we collaborate. Now, what is interesting is this, that both sides are trying to achieve efficiency, but they do not they do that in different ways, and they rarely meet. They do not always meet, but they rarely meet. So if we start from the bottom with data, data is what we share. Because if we start from the bottom of the system, before standards and before products, we find something very simple, that data is actually a consequence of efficiency. I mean, public transport systems have become digital because it is more efficient than being analog. So timetables, they used to be printed, updates were slow, information was local, and so on. Today, everything is digital. And that is not primarily because of some kind of innovation. It's because digital systems are more efficient. So data as such is not the goal. Data is the result of a system that has been optimized for efficiency. Now, something important has happened within the European Union. Through the so-called ITS directive, and later through the MMTIS regulation, data has moved from being an internal asset to something closer to public infrastructure. And the logic is very clear, that if public transport is a system, then the information about that system must be accessible. So operators, authorities, infrastructure managers are nowadays required to make data available. And it's not only static data such as timetables, stops, and routes. Nowadays, it's also dynamic data. And in general, this is a major shift because it changes expectations. Data is not longer something that you can choose to share. It is something you are expected to provide. So in Sweden, we have taken this approach quite far for the last 15 years. Through Trafiklab, which is a platform where transport data is made available through datasets and APIs. We have created a shared way of accessing data across the sector. And this was not just a technical initiative. This was coordinated, it was mandated by authorities, and it was co-financed also by infrastructure actors. And it has enabled journey planners, mobility services, and all kind of third-party innovation. So in many ways, it is a success. And yet, there is something important we need to recognize. EU has largely solved the availability problem, but they have not solved the use problem. So data exists, it is shared, and it is accessible, but that does not mean it creates value, because data in itself do not solve anything. It describes the system, but it does not make the system work. So this is where the next challenge appears, because once data is available, we need to understand it. Different actors must interpret it in the same way, and that is not guaranteed. It can still be inconsistent, data can still be incomplete and difficult to combine. So the problem shifts from do we have data to do we understand it in the same way? And it is exactly here where we move to the next layer, standards. If data is about what we share, then standards are about how we describe it. Because once data is available, we face a new problem, and that's not whether it exists, but whether it is or can be understood. And this is where standards comes in. Standards are in many ways about efficiency. It reduces friction. They make it possible for different systems built by different actors in different countries to actually talk to each other. And in public transport, we work with several types of standards. Let me give you a few examples. In Europe, we have NetX. It's a very comprehensive standard for transport data. It can describe timetable stops, networks, and fare structures in great detail. It is very powerful, but also complex. Globally, we have GTFS and its real-time extension GTFS-RT. It's much simpler, it's more lightweight, and it's easier to implement. And that is why they have spread so widely with GTFS. And already here we see something very interesting, is that more detail is not always better. Sometimes simplicity scales faster. But standards are not only about describing data, they are also about enabling interaction. So for example, we have the OSDM standard, the Open Sales and Distribution Model. That's an API standard, for let's say booking flows. And this is where things starts to become so much more concrete, because now we are not just describing the system, we are enabling transactions. So in Sweden, through Samtrafiken, we were the first in Europe to implement the OSDM standard for multimodal journeys. And what we learned is this. It is one thing to agree on a standard. It's a totally different thing to make it work in reality. Because a standard is never fully complete, it has always room for interpretations. And suddenly we have what I would call dialects of standards. So everyone is following the standard, but slightly in different ways. And that is usually very bad for interoperability. Because interoperability does not just require standard, it requires consistency. So what do we do here? We start to standardize not only the data, but also how we use the standards. So in Sweden, we standardize how tickets should be presented to customers, what information should be visible, and how all this kind of communication should work. And we also standardize the flows. For instance, how should the OSDM booking process actually work, step by step? Because without that, even a shared API standard is not enough. So here's the key insight of this is that standards, they reduce complexity, absolutely, but only if they're used in the same way. Otherwise, they simply move complexity from systems to interpretation. And that is something that we have seen again and again in Sweden. So if we go back to our model that data makes things possible, standards makes things understandable. But they still do not guarantee that things work together, because for that we need alignment. And that takes us to the next layer, which is products. If data is about what we share and standards is about how we describe it, then products are about something much more concrete. Products are what we offer, what the traveler actually experiences. And that is where everything becomes real, because in the end of the day, the traveler does not see your data. They don't see your standards, not your architecture and so on. What they see a ticket, a price, a brand, and a promise. And they ask themselves a very simple question, does this work for me? And this is important because it's the only place in the system where you actually create value. Everything else here so far, what I've been talking about, data standards and systems, they are enablers in a way, but products are where value is delivered to the customers. But this is also where something else enters the system, the market. Because products, they are definitely not neutral. They are shaped by actors. And in public transport, we have a very particular situation, at least in Sweden, but in many countries. We have public authorities, we have regional transport providers, national rail operators, we have commercial actors, and third-party resellers. All of them are offering some kind of products. And all of them are interacting with the same traveler, the consumer. And all of them, they have their own interests. Some of them want to maximize ridership, for instance. Some want to maximize revenue. And some want just to fulfill political goals. And some want to build some kind of new business. And all this comes together in this product layer. And now there is another dimension here that is often underestimated. That's brands. Public transport is not just a system, it's a collection of identities. You have national brands, you usually have local brands, and you definitely have commercial brands. And all of these are coexisting, and all of them are visible to the traveler, the consumers. And each of them want to be recognized. They want to be chosen and they want to be trusted. So the product is not just functional, it is also very much emotional. Travelers and consumers, they are not rational. They are also, if I may say, vain. They want a product that works, of course, but they also want a brand they can relate to. And a product they can recognize and a service they feel comfortable using. The feeling is very important when you're talking about brands. And this creates tension because from the system perspective, you might want simplicity, one interface, one identity. But from an actor perspective, you want visibility, differentiation, and recognition. And some kind of one-size-fits-all solution is not always attractive. So this is where we arrive to something fundamental. Products are where interests collide. Because when you define a product, you're not just defining one offer. You are defining also that who owns the customer, who sets the price, and who receives the revenue, who carries the risk, and so on, who represents the brand. All of these, they are not small questions. They go to each and every organization's core role in the system. And here we can assume that maybe a regional authority, they may want control over pricing and they want a strong public brand. Whereas a commercial operator, they want more flexibility and are definitely wanting a direct consumer and customer relationship. Whereas a national initiative like mine in Sweden, we want integration and we want simplicity for the traveler. And these goals, they do not always align, I can tell you. So when we talk about interoperable ticketing, we are not just talking about making the systems compatible. We are talking about aligning the business models, aligning incentives, and aligning identities. And this is why this layer is so difficult. Because conflicts here are not technical. They are economical, political, organizational, and last but not least, emotional. So, if you go back to our structure here, we can now see something clearly, that data makes things possible, standard makes them understandable. But products, they make things real. And in that, that is where the system here is fully tested in the product layer. Because if the product doesn't work, nothing else matters. And if the actors cannot agree on the product, then integration will not happen. Which brings us to the next and most critical question. If this is where interests collide, how do we actually make things work together? And that leads us to the most important layer of all. It's the governance, how we collaborate. But let me approach the system from the other direction, because so far we have been looking at public transport from the bottom. It's the data, standards, and products. And we have seen the complexity emerging, and as we move closer to the traveler. But we can also start from the opposite direction, from the top. At the very top, we have politics. This is where the direction, the vision is defined, the why. What do we want public transport to achieve? regarding sustainability, accessibility, regional development, economic growth, or whatever. The important thing is that there is a vision, a direction for the society. But let us go back to the question we started with. Why do we have public transport? Because if we look carefully, even here, underneath all these goals, we find the same principle: efficiency. Politics is trying to create efficient movement of people, efficient use of infrastructure, and efficient use of public funding. But politics does something else as well. It makes choices. Who should be prioritized? Where should subsidies go? And what are we investing in? And those choices, they actually shape the system. They do not build it, but that's where the authorities come in. Because authorities are the instruments of politics, the who. They translate intention into action because the authorities, they can plan, procure, regulate, and fund, and so on. And in most countries, they are organized across multiple levels. They are often separated by modes. They can be national, regional, local, each with their own mandate, and last but not least, their own budgets and their own responsibilities and so on. And this is where something interesting happens, because even if politics is aligned and authorities are often not, responsibilities are scattered. One authority plans local transport, another manages maybe the rail infrastructure, and the third regulates the market. And each of them is trying to optimize their part of the system efficiently, but not necessarily together. So what we start to see here is that fragmentation does not only exist in data systems and products, it also exists on the top, in public governance structures, in public responsibilities, and in public decision making. And this creates a very important dynamic because now we have fragmentation from the bottom and from the top. And both are trying to meet in the same place in the product. Now, let us connect these two perspectives. From the bottom, we saw data is available, standards exist, and products are created. And from the top, we see that goals are defined, responsibilities are assigned, and funding is allocated. So in theory, everything is in place, and yet we still do not get integrated systems. Why? Because these two worlds are not aligned. The bottom-up world is much driven by technology, market dynamics, and operational efficiency. Whereas the top-down world is driven by policy, mandates, and public objectives. And they operate with different logics. They have different incentives and different time horizons. And this leads us to another core tension. And that is that from the top, we want control, we want a direction, and we want accountability. Whereas from the bottom, we want flexibility, we want innovation and adaptation. And both of these are necessary, but they are not naturally compatible. So what happens? Often we build systems that cannot be fully used, and products that cannot be fully aligned, and policies that cannot be fully implemented. And that is a result that is inefficiency. But let us go back here to our core idea that public transport exists because it is efficient. But what we are seeing is a system as a whole is not operating efficiently. Not because individual parts are so inefficient, but it's because the connections between them are weak. So the question becomes, what connects actually these two worlds? To ensure that data is used in a meaningful way, that standards are applied consistently, products are aligned with a policy, and authorities work together. Because without that, efficiency will not be realized. And that brings us to the most important layer, governance. The how. How we collaborate, how we align, how we make decisions together. Because in the end, interoperable ticketing and shared sales are not technical achievements, they are organizational achievements. They are the result of actors choosing to work together. And that is what Samtrafiken is all about. So let me bring all this together. We started with one simple question here, that why do we have public transport? And we said it's because it is efficient. And we looked at the system from two directions, from the bottom, data standards and products, and from the top, politics and authorities. And what we saw very clearly is this, that both sides are in a way optimized. We have more data than ever. We have more and better standards than ever. And we have more sophisticated products than ever. And at the same time, we have clear political ambitions. You can always argue how clear, but anyway, some kind of clear political ambitions. We have strong public institutions, usually, at least in Sweden, but in many countries. And we definitely have significant public investments. So, everything should work, but it doesn't. And the reason is not the lack of technology. It's not the lack of data. It's not even lack of ambition. It's not lack of, it is the lack of connection, a lack of alignment, and a lack of collaboration. Because efficiency does not come from optimizing the parts. It comes from optimizing the system. And the system is not defined by its components. It is defined by the relationship between the components. And that is what governance is all about. It's not control, it's not hierarchy, but coordination. Governance is the infrastructure of cooperation. This is where something interesting happens. Because compared to everything else in this industry, we can talk about infrastructure. It's very expensive. Vehicles are expensive. Technology is also expensive. But governance is relatively small and inexpensive. And yet it has a huge potential to unlock everything else. So if I would leave you with one idea, it would be this, that efficiency in governance creates more value than efficiency in any single layer. Efficiency in governance creates more value than efficiency in any single layer that we have been talking about. Because if we look at our total mobility system today, not only the public transport, the total mobility system, it is in many ways deeply inefficient. We have all too many vehicles, we have all too much infrastructure, and we have all too much unused capacity. We have an enormous mobility system used far below its potential. And that is actually not good for anyone, not for operators, not for authorities, not for the society, and certainly not for the consumers, the travelers. And this brings me back to the title of my talk here, the interoperable ticketing and realities of shared sales. Because the reality in this is that interoperability is not about systems. And shared sales is not about platforms. It is about actors choosing to work together. And that is hard, I can tell you, after 20 years as the managing director in Samtrafiken. Because it requires trust, it requires transparency, and a lot of compromise. But that is exactly what we have tried to do in Sweden through Samtrafiken. We are not the biggest actor or the strongest actor, but we are something totally else. We are a place where actors meet, where agreements are made, and where conflicts are handled, and where collaboration becomes possible. That's our role. Not to control the system, but to make system work together. Because in the end, you can have a perfect vision and you can have perfect data and standards. You can even have good products. But without cooperation, you will never have a system that works for the traveler. So, if you want to improve your mobility system, do not start with the technology, not with the products. You start with this question: how do we want to work together? How do we want to work together? Because that, more than anything else, will determine whether your mobility system succeeds. Thank you very much.
So indeed, thank you very much for this very systematic lecture. It was a very meta-level lecture about the system and its components. Yes, less about this very practical, experience-oriented ways. How do you actually do the interoperable ticketing? How does it then practically look like? So perhaps from that perspective, you could give us a very short overview also. So what it is exactly that you at Samtrafik can do, what makes the ticketing and booking system interoperable for the customer? What is the product of your work?
Thank you. The product of our work, we call it Res Plus, and that is that you can go from any stop, any bus stop or station anywhere in Sweden to anywhere with one ticket. That can include any mode, and it can include different operators. It's commercial operators and public operators, and all this is let's say available in one API. It's managed by a lot of different inventory systems, ticketing systems, and so on. But what we have is that we make all of these systems work together so that the selling parties, the one that are actually selling, they can sell the whole offering from anywhere to anywhere in one ticket. That's easily said the core of our business today.
Yes. Yes, so do you also work internationally, may I ask, or do your products end, or your collaboration network extend to Norway, for example?
We consider both Copenhagen and Oslo being a part of Western Sweden, so they are in the system.
Of course. So you can go to Copenhagen easily with your ticketing system.
Yeah.
Yes. Excellent. Is this model of yours? Do you know any analogs from elsewhere in Europe where the system has been taken to that far, to that successful collaboration that you have in Sweden?
Yes, we have the most let's say equal not competitor but the equal organization is the Entur in Norway. It's steered in a totally different way, but they also try to make this same kind of door-to-door ticketing from in Norway. They are not there yet, and it's not as complete as Sweden's. We have been doing this since 1993, so meaning, what is it, 33 years now. So we have made it already on analog times and now to the fully digital times, and Norway is on that path now also. There are countries that are not focusing on, let's say, the booking flows. You are not booking tickets like in the Netherlands. You seldomly book tickets. You just buy tickets. You don't need to book them beforehand. You buy a ticket and then you jump on a train, because it's usually so short distance trains that you don't need to pre-book them, and that makes that you can have a national ticketing system, and which is a different thing from having a national booking infrastructure. It gets a bit technical. I thought that I wouldn't be this technical today, but it gets a bit technical. You are at least you are the Department of Geography, aren't you? It's
Correct.
not. It's not technology. So I thought that I keep it simple on the technical side. But it's a big difference if you have ticketing only or if you have booking and ticketing. In Sweden, we have booking and ticketing. In small, geographically small countries, you usually have only ticketing.
Okay.
Then you have a much bigger problem, that meaning international sales. I mean, in the Netherlands, you need to sell tickets to Belgium, France, Luxembourg, Germany, Denmark, England, everywhere. So they have much more challenges with the international sales.
When we come to geography, there are plenty of questions. I'm sure also people here in our room have many questions, but I have a privilege to start still asking, continuing with some of them. It really is nationwide, or it's all over Sweden. But I assume mostly the travel modes are public transportation modes, like trains and buses, and you do not have shared bikes or shared scooters or shared cars in your platform. Or do you have them?
Not yet. But there is now emerging because it comes with I briefly said about the EU ambitions here. So it's the ITS directive, and there we have the so-called MMTIS regulation that where the EU says what kind of data should be accessible in the so-called national access point. We are, by the way, we are the national access point for public transport data in Sweden. So what should be in the national access point? And that is now extended from public transport data also to all kind of shared mobility data, meaning shared bikes and e-bikes and pool cars and all things like that is now regulated also to be in the national access point, and that seems to be falling into our databases also.
This is really a very great value for many. We of course see a lot of value in data in the bottom of your pillar as well, and then providing the knowledge about human behavior based on that data, so which could then be a valid asset for policymakers as well as authorities, as well as those who own the products and then design them. So data allows us to understand the behavior. What would you say? What are like the benefits for operators on different scales, like for urban operators who already are in the core of some functional urban regions, or for those operators who function in a more peripheral areas? So just to bring out some of the benefits, assets that your partners actually feel or understand. Yeah.
The main, it's on different levels. If I start with the benefit for the actual consumer, the traveler, there the benefit is that you let's say have access to the whole offering in a simple way. That's a benefit for the traveler. The benefit for the operators, and this is has been quite challenging over the years, is that also competitors they benefit from let's say being a part of a greater offer than only their own. And this is one of the let's say core problems in this kind of a cooperation, is that you have the former monopolies that used to have 100% of the market, and they only see in front of them a shrinking market share. But what has happened in Sweden, if you talk about rail-based public transport, both short distance and long distance, what has happened is that it has, I think it's about 3 to 4 times bigger, more passenger capacity now than it was in the 90s. So yes, the former monopoly have reduced market share, but the market has been exploding, and it's so much bigger. So of course their let's say their business is bigger than it was before, but they had 100% of the market share. So there is also, but it's a mental shift for the former monopolies that, and it can be also regional monopoly, that you have maybe a city transport that has a monopoly situation, and then you add the, let's say, commuter trains to that, and then that should, for instance, be added in Tallinn region, and then you should add some other services. The whole religion here is that you believe in that, then it will grow, then the market will grow, and your share will be a part of the growing. Your let's say business will grow, but your share will shrink. And this is sometimes I talk about this as a religious thing, in the way that you need to believe in the greater good here. As long as it's scattered, it will never prevail.
Yes, it's like being really a priest and remembering and or talking to all the parties about the greater goods. As you said, the incentives actually are located differently, but this is about aligning your expectations and identifying the core value that different operators share. So, and this identity or this core value is identified, then it's easier to come and collaborate also in formats that might feel counterintuitive. Yes, more questions to come, but yes, I would like to give the opportunity to our audience members here. Yes.
I actually have 3 questions. Does interoperable ticketing actually increase public transport usage, or does it only improve the user experience?
It's let's say, it's very difficult to measure exactly how much it has, let's say, improved, because at the same time we have improved in Sweden. We have improved the system. All the regions, all the public transport authorities and providers and operators have increased their offering and so on. So, and then we have the element of pricing, that how you price it and so on. So what is actually then making something more attractive or not, it's difficult to say which part brings how much value. But what I am totally convinced of is that a scattered system is not as let's say, attractive for the consumers as a unified system. And we can see it's a lot of things that let's say can bring things together and make it, let's say, growing. And for instance, we see quite an interesting thing in Stockholm area, whereas they implemented this tap and go with the credit card, and they see that the mean price went up, but because it's you pay single tickets with a credit card, so the mean price went up, but the customer satisfaction also went up. So it's just the making the let's say system accessible and easy makes ridership growing. So it's not as simple as only having the price, or as only having one let's say aspect here that is making something let's say attractive for the consumers. It's all of these together. But what I can say is that a system that you can access as one is more attractive than a scattered system. But I can't give you a figure.
Okay, you also answered my second question, what was about the prices. But the third one is, if some country would like to implement the interoperable system, then who might oppose the most? The politics or the passengers, or between?
No, the former monopolies. We were touching that a little bit, but it's the former monopolies that usually has the toughest let's say thing to eat here, because they see themselves as loser. They quite often we have seen it in regions, for instance, or in city traffics and things like that. That they already have their customers. Why should we collaborate with that and that and that party? We already have them. We are only giving away a part of our revenue if they are if we are in a larger cooperation, and that takes time for people to let's say digest that it's maybe not the case. You are maybe not having all the customers that are relevant for you.
Yes, but now with your 23 years of experience, you certainly must also have data for the monopolies to give. So what does statistics say about that, them losing or winning? So it's not in that case only about trust, but it's also about analog to be replicated, transferred to another region. Is it so?
I mean, it's a lot about. I would say our system in Sweden is very, let's say, scattered in the way that we have 21 regions, and almost all of them are also having rail operation. And before we had national rail doing all rail operation in Sweden. Now we have all these regions having their own rail operation, meaning commuter trains and things like that, and also interregional trains. The regions go together and they have quite extensive train systems, and they wouldn't have been at all as successful if they wouldn't have been a part of the national rail system. So they were from the beginning a part of the national rail system. So they had never experienced how it would have been to have a regional rail without the connection to the national rail, because we had it from the beginning. So we don't need to convince the regions now, but I could have a lot of data that how much of the sales, especially of the longer distance sales in the regional systems, are sold through the national channels. That we have a lot of data, and we see that it's a different kind of let's say travelers coming from the national system than coming from the regional systems. That we can clearly see in the data. So yes, we do have data in this kind of if we want to analyze it in these kind of dimensions.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for the very systematic presentation. Indeed, very interesting. But I have one bit provocative question. Where would you put customers in your system? In the lower part or on the upper part?
No, I would say that the customers, I mean, as I said, the only layer that is meeting the customer is the products. It's only when you have an offering that is packaged into a product to the customer, that's where the customer comes in. You can have whatever politics or authorities or whatever systems. If you don't have an attractive product, then you won't have customers. So
but what
it
makes
is
the product attractive? Isn't there any demand coming from customers? Where they want to go, at what time do they want to go, what transport modes, etc.
It's a lot of things that a lot of demands from the customers, of course. The basic is that they have a need for travel from somewhere to somewhere in some kind of frequency. Somebody travels that every day, and somebody else travels it once a year. So there is a need somewhere, of course, for movement. But then it comes to all this packaging that how do you package it into a product that is it a, let's say, for instance, a monthly pass containing all of the offering, or is it just per journey, paying per journey, or what kind of subscriptions do you have, and to what price? So that is where the pricing comes in, and all of these affects the consumer, let's say, perception of the system. And what I wanted to highlight today is that when we also are, let's say, combining even more the commercial world with the public world, then the trademarks and the incentive, the brands and the incentives behind being a commercial operator is totally different from being a public operator. But they both have brands, and they both have let's say, the intention of being not owning the customer. Nobody owns a customer, but at least you can own the customer relationship. And here is where you really have the conflicts, and we haven't come that far on a city level, because what I would foresee is that if you take now you are in Tartu, but you have the Tartu public transport and Bolt, for instance. They should the customer would probably appreciate a combined package with some kind of service with both of those, because sometimes I want the one and sometimes I want the other, and this is the packaging problem is very essential here. I mean, we have seen the experiments made, or not the only experiments, but the serious attempt made by WIM, the mass operator in Finland, that also were having services in different countries. But only being the service provider was not attractive enough for any party. It wasn't attractive for the customer, and not attractive for the neither the public transport operators or for the commercial operators. So only being that is not enough. So then it needs to be something else that is the driving factor for having, let's say, products on a city level.
Another question, more from a practical perspective. Does your product somehow involve also harmonizing not only the tickets, but also lines and schedules?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if we go through the scheduling, the scheduling sequence here, it starts with national rail, and then it goes into regional rail, and then the regional rail has, let's say, make the bus lane system based on how the rail system works, and so on. So it starts from the most long distance rail to then buses, and then to what kind of services you have, your commute, or your let's say ordinary services that you have. And here we have different conflicts and interests also. I mean, my job has been always solving all these kind of different kind of conflicts, because the national rail, they want, of course, efficient city to city traffic to work, whereas a regional commuter rail, they want hard timetables that every 15 minutes the train is leaving, and the customers, usually the local customers, they appreciate hard timetables, and so on. So there is a lot of let's say conflict here, but it starts from the larger, difficult to change systems into more agile systems, smaller systems in the whole traffic planning. But it's quite an let's say complex planning work, and here AI comes with a lot of new things. We have a lot of pilots going on where you actually have, based on based on data. The planning system also is totally based on data, and with the goal of having a so-called dynamic planning, that the planning is happening all the time for the let's say transport system, and it's far away from the rail thinking that you once a year plan a timetable to go to online let's say dynamic planning, that actually mobility, now I'm talking about the mobile phone data, is giving you the hint of where you need to have lines going at what time and so on. So not a lot needs to be done, and a lot of data is used for that.
Okay, thank you. And I have a question. You lot of mentioned during this presentation, I think mainly on this product level, but also somewhere else on this feeling, emotions, and identities. And the question is that how you take this into account. You take some research to map these identities, or how you handle on during this process to this aspects.
It's our products is actually not facing the customer, so we are not doing things to the customer, but our let's say the participants, the operators in the system that we are let's say collaborating in, they are facing the customer. They want always to let's say differentiate, and we want as little differentiation as possible. So what this means is that our role is that when we say, for instance, if one rail operator wants to have third class, first, second, and third class, let's say in their offering, everybody else has first and second class, then that makes a huge problem into the combined systems, because if only one operator has this, it makes it very difficult. What we do is that we try to solve this kind of thing together, and then usually the other ones, then either they follow with having also third class, or then not. But we at least we discuss about it, and how should we let's say make that kind of differentiation work in the common offer. The operators, they obviously make these kind of investigations, that what do the customers actually want, what do they appreciate, how do they relate to our brand, what is let's say the big thing. And the experience here from Sweden is that when we had the first long distance rail challenge, let's say competitor to the old monopoly, long distance fast train rail competitor to the old monopoly, they were agile, a small company, they had new things all the time, and every time the old monopoly made the same things half a year later or 1 year later or something like that. So what has happened is that during the, let's say, competition and liberalization, the small operators have come up with ideas, and then the big former monopoly has taken up the ideas that were good. so it's difficult to differentiate for too long, because the other ones can copy it quite fast. But it's we don't have any, as answering your question, we don't have any let's say longer or deeper customer surveys on what they want, because that is made by the operators.
Thank you.
Okay, you have brought up very interesting dilemma on stability versus dynamics. So as you say, customers want hard timetables or some regional commuter train operators want hard timetables. And I think in this kind of mobility service provision, some stability is really required, so that I know that the bus leaves always 10 after. So this gives us experience, but also time to adapt our habits, our practices, and keep going. And if I don't need a bus or a train every week, but I know in half a year it's still working in a similar way, but at the same time we might get stuck. And this dynamic planning based on recent data, real-time data, and AI-driven planning or data-driven planning, not data-informed planning, comes in with much force, I would assume. So what is your position in this kind of dynamics versus stability dilemma? So what works the best? Where do you find the balance between them two?
That's a very good question, and here is one problem that arises, is that us being managing a collaboration with between about 50 actors. It's about 50 actors in Sweden, meaning that as we are not on top of those, we cannot regulate anything. We can only collaborate. So there is no let's say umbrella function that is saying that we should do like this and this and this. No, that we don't have. We have that they might have more of in Norway. There the Entur is much more an umbrella organization on top of everything, whereas we are, as I said here, in the middle. In the middle, we try to govern the different aspects coming both from northbound and southbound here into some usable products for the consumers. But answering your question here, that how is it affected? It's affected very much, and the hardest part to change is the rail infrastructure not operator, but the infrastructure, meaning Trafikverket, the authority that we have in Sweden, because they are maybe not that flexible. They are very used to do things as it has been done for ages, and it all starts from there, because, as I said, the whole planning process starts from the rail and then zippers down to the bus and finer network.
Interesting. So it also relates to now the final question, and then we will close. Whether this kind of collaboration should be somehow regulated by law, or should it be voluntary? Which also means that if it's voluntary or like market-based, it's more dynamic. If it's regulated, it's more stable and expectable. Things come out from that. And you also mentioned several EU standards behind that. So how do you position now your location in this axis?
As I mentioned earlier, our system in Sweden with Samtrafiken, that's voluntary based, whereas Entur in Norway is compulsory by law. And I would say that both can work, but the most important thing is that the ones that are actually paying for the collaboration, that they also have a saying in that in which direction they want the development to happen. In Sweden, we have it voluntary, but the board of Samtrafiken consists of the directors of the largest stakeholders, and they decide what to do next. So that I think is one very important key in having it successful. But it could be another way. It could be by law also. But you need the one that the biggest stakeholders need to be the ones that is steering. Otherwise, it gets top down and doesn't work.
Yeah, But the regulation comes handy when we talk about data and standards, doesn't it?
It does, definitely. And there the EU helps us.
Yes. So with this notion, we will close our session today. So Gerhard, once again, big thanks for this very insightful session or lecture. There is much to learn from it, anywhere here in Europe at least. And with that, we say thank you again. Applause from our end. And for the final note, next lecture will take place in 2 weeks' time on May 7th. And then we will host Lauren Alice Kelly from Behaviour Studio. Her lecture offers a practitioner's guide to spotting and redesigning the behavioral levels built into public transport systems, such as fare rules, ticketing flows, or journey planners, to nudge people towards walking, cycling, and the use of public transport. So very much looking forward to that lecture in 2 weeks' time as well. Thank you to our audience online and people here, and big thanks again to Gerhard Wennerström from Samtrafiken. Bye-bye.